I'm Tom Mapes. I'm the founder and president of the Digital Energy Council. A quick intro on what we do at the Digital Energy Council. We represent, among others, miners in this sector. When we founded it, we felt there's a gap between the digital energy world, Bitcoin miners, and the traditional energy sector. You guys have heard a lot of conversations today about the energy world, but our goal is to bring more and more of the traditional, power providers, utilities, in this case, nuclear energy ecosystem to these conversations. So that is where Benton comes into play here with the Nuclear Energy Institute. Benton, if you want to give an introduction.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Tom. So I'm Benton Arnett. I'm Senior Director of Markets and Policy at the Nuclear Energy Institute. That involves a lot of different things. On the market side, I do market design work, customer work, do a lot of deal structuring work, and really try to set up nuclear in a position to be able to service the needs of a variety of different demands, including Bitcoin mining. And then on the policy side, working to make sure that as we go down this decarbonization path, we're fully valuing our nuclear assets and making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success so we can deliver, clean, affordable power to ratepayers.
Appreciate it. And just one last background on both of ourselves. Obviously, Ben's at the Nuclear Energy Institute. My background before with the Digital Energy Council was at the Department of Energy, worked on Capitol Hill at the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, among others. So we come into this obviously with an energy lens here, and I tell our members at the DEC, you're energy companies at the end of the day, and you have to think like them and be engaged in these conversations. So, with that, Ben, I guess I'll kick things off with, as miners continue to grow, we've heard a lot about that today. Nuclear is one area where it's been growing in several different aspects. There's companies I know in this room or in this building, if they're not in the room, are mining directly on site at reactors. I know there's been some MOUs and some agreements signed for the development and build out of small modular reactors, SMRs. I guess we'll just kick it off with how does the nuclear energy industry, I guess you could speak on behalf of NEI, kind of how are they viewing this increased demand coming from a new technology such as Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I start off by saying it's welcomed, right? I think, I represent a lot of electricity providers, energy providers, reactor developers, and their job is to ultimately sell power. And so the more demand for power that we see, the more opportunities that creates for us to sell products. So very welcome. But I think there's actually a really important partnership that can exist between nuclear and Bitcoin mining. And I think that exists for both the existing fleet of reactors, but also these new SMRs that you mentioned. And so, when I think about the existing fleet, one of the challenges we've seen over the last decade or so is that if you're operating in a deregulated market, those markets go negative at times, right? When we think about a nuclear plants want to operate at steady state. They want to be base load, operate all the time. They don't ramp up and down. And so that forces them into a situation where you're selling your main product for a negative price. And I don't care what business you're in, that's a pretty tough sell if you're paying someone to take your product. And so the ability of Bitcoin mining, though, to ramp up and down very, very quickly has created this really great partnership. And we're seeing that play out at a number of different plants around the country. When we think about the next fleet of nuclear reactors, we think about SMRs, those are going to need demand. And they're going to need demand, but they're also going to need to work within a world that's going to have a higher penetration of renewables. I mean, that's just a fact. And so they're going to also need to be able to think about how they can ramp up and down, how they can adjust, and how they can provide that power. And so having a really consistent off-taker or a really flexible off-taker, I should say, like a Bitcoin miner, can make those projects much more attractive. And so as we look to some of the first movers, we're seeing a lot of crypto companies step forward and be interested in partnering. And so that's been very welcome.
Just real quick on that, you mentioned kind of miners coming in as first movers, and obviously the hot topic around DC energy policy, and I guess you could say energy policy throughout the country, if not the world, is kind of miners. They're kind of grouping everyone together: miners, traditional data centers, AI. Everyone brings their own best practices forward with this. Miners, obviously, the flexibility. AI is the new kind of, for lack of a better term, the sexy word in the room. Everyone's talking about and you know, then there's the traditional data world. You know, are you seeing each of those kind of coming in? Is one fitting better than the other, or is there, you know, areas of improvement for each? Are they kind of co-locating? Are you seeing good stories from each of those?
Yeah, I think we're seeing good stories from both. I think, you know, when we look at, you know, willingness to pay and who's coming in and willing to pay the most, you know, I think the AI data centers tend to fit that bill a little bit more, and so we're starting to see a few of those deals. But the reality is when they look at doing behind the meter deals, they're going to have to overbuild to reach the level of reliability that they need. Even with a nuclear plant, we have to plan for maintenance. You know, a lot of our plants go down for refueling outages and such. And so we're going to need to have that excess power to even service those types of demand. And I think finding an offtake for that more variable power is where we also see the Bitcoin miners coming in. And so I really think it's an opportunity for everyone to work together. I don't see them as much of in competition. It's more so there's a subset of the power from these multi-plant complexes that's really well suited for high reliability requirements like AI data centers. But there's going to be a lot of power that's going to be really well suited for Bitcoin mining as well.
And you mentioned kind of the behind the meter opportunities that this brings. I'm going to kind of skip along here to the next skip over question here, but you know, to that point, obviously I touched on it earlier, the idea of SMRs getting rolled out, and for lack of a better term, the red tape that's involved in that. You know, for years it's been seen as the next step in nuclear. I know some seasoned faces in the room have worked in this field for a long time, and I'm sure they have stories for decades on this stuff. But you know, building them is seen easier said than done. Do you see a world where, you know, kind of, can you elaborate more on that kind of piece? Can miners help facilitate some faster builds, or, you know, we want our power yesterday, and obviously the NRC has different thoughts on that. You know, is there an opportunity for these two industries to kind of help facilitate faster builds on some of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I don't even think it's an opportunity. I think it's happening now. I mean, when the biggest thing when we think about the NRC and going into the regulator and getting a project through is, you know, the NRC is going to allocate resources based on how serious they think you are. And so if I go in and I pitch a reactor and I've got, you know, an idea that I'm going to sell power, you know, into a grid, or maybe some kind of a little bit more uncertain, you know, interconnection question, that's going to delay or at least diminish the amount of attention that regulator gives us. But if you can go into that regulator with a really good project and say, look, I'm going to partner with this credible off-taker who needs my power tomorrow, that lights a fire, and that makes them move faster. You know, I think one of the interesting things we're also seeing play out is this idea of, you know, virtual peaker plants. So if I have a nuclear power plant that's operating, you know, at base load, a new SMR, and I partner that with a Bitcoin miner, then now all of a sudden, whenever the grid needs power, whenever power prices are higher or just demand is higher, you know, we can flex. And all of a sudden, from a grid operator standpoint, looks just like a peaker plant. I don't think there's a single zero carbon peaker plant out there. And so this is a really interesting opportunity, and something I think we're seeing a lot of folks start to develop projects around.
Yeah, exactly. And to the kind of clean baseload you touched on, you know, energy generation has been a hot topic. I've heard some other panels talk about that, and I think that, you know, in our world, I guess in this room, examples of seeing the generation, the demand side are, you know, there's that EIA reporting requirement, the White House proposed 30% taxation on the end use of power. There's examples such as that, but ultimately, I think the argument gets down to, you know, generation's been the hot topic among the United States government and how we're getting that generation. And I think that's debates for, you know, maybe another day. But you know, I know we've heard a lot about the abundance versus scarcity argument here, and how are you guys kind of building and preparing for that conversation?
Yeah, I was actually really pleased to hear a lot of the abundance versus scarcity conversation pop up throughout the panels today. I think it's one of the most important conversations going on right now. I think a lot of folks don't realize that there are a number of decarbonization scenarios that are planning for scarcity, right? Scarcity is not a byproduct, it's a function. And I don't, you know, I think if we choose to go down that route, you know, the cake's a lie. That's a false choice. we're not going to end up in a world where consumers are going to accept scarcity. There's a story I love to tell. When Energy Star introduced a new refrigerator standard, and we had a huge efficiency gains in refrigerators, there was this wonderful dynamic where we sent out all these refrigerators. Everyone expected household electricity demand to go down because they're using more efficient refrigerators. And we started seeing household demand go up. And people said, why is that? Well, it's because everyone bought their new refrigerator, and they took their old refrigerator and they moved it into their garage, and they put their beer in it, right? Because people consume power to better their lives. They don't consume power for some useless purpose. And so when you start telling people they can't use power, you're impacting their quality of life. And consumers just aren't going to accept that. I think the only way we're going to reach decarbonization is if we plan for abundance. And so these conversations around, should Bitcoin be able to access power? I mean, it's really a little bit of a canary in the coal mine for what I think we're going to see down the road for more general consumers. And I think policymakers need to be paying a lot more attention to that.
And I agree with you. And one thing we're trying to do with the Digital Energy Council is to kind of, I don't feel like it's too dramatic, but you mentioned canary in the coal mine here of current regulatory affairs or, generation, they're trying to figure out the generation piece here. And the first step to, if they don't have enough generation, is to figure out the large loads that they deem unnecessary. And that's kind of who they're starting with. And I think all industry should kind of be keeping a close eye of what we're dealing with right now, because ultimately that's going to be their fight down the road as well. And to that point, this past January, the Digital Energy Council and NEI held the first of its kind Digital Energy Roundtable, where we had a meeting getting leaders of our two industries together and kind of hashing out some of these conversations and how our industries can kind of work together and kind of fill some of these gaps between the Bitcoin miners, nuclear energy in this particular instance. And one thing that really stuck with me from that conversation was Benton said, he kind of laughed to close out the meeting, that said that nuclear energy has been dealing with a lot of these negative connotations or negative views from policymakers for decades. And can you kind of expand on that to the audience? And I think there's some good lessons learned of what you guys had to deal with. Nuclear for a long time wasn't this viewed by many as the greatest, baseload use, and now all of a sudden they're realizing if you want clean baseload power, you need nuclear. So I don't know, can you explain some lessons learned from that comment?
Yeah. Well, first off, Tom, I want to thank you for that engagement. I think we started talking kind of late last year, and we're ultimately able to pull together this roundtable that will be one of many to come, and that's been a really great opportunity, I think, for both of our industries to talk about the needs of the other and to really work through some solutions. And so we're not going to get to where we need to be sitting in our own little silos. And so looking forward to more of those kinds of engagements. One of the areas I think that we see really shift a lot of perception around nuclear that I think applies very equally to Bitcoin is just the ability to be transparent. There's all these misconceptions out there. Everyone thinks, Bitcoin's only used for illicit transactions. There's been a lot of good talk about that here today. I think that sentiment still exists. People still believe that that's the primary use of a lot of these assets. In the nuclear world, we had a lot of these same misconceptions about safety and about how clean the asset is, and a big part to breaking through the opposition was correcting those misconceptions. And so going out and really addressing them head on has had a really beneficial impact. I think the other area that we talked about a little bit at the event that's important is making it clear what the future environmental scenario looks like that includes your industry. And so being able to paint the picture of nuclear's role in a decarbonized future has gone a long way to having a lot of environmentalists change their perception. And I think the very same is true for Bitcoin.
In the couple minutes we have here, obviously, at any of these conferences, you're going to hear how great we are and all that stuff. But I just have to ask you the question, within your membership, I know you guys have talked about this independently of the DEC or other Bitcoin groups being there. We talked about all the positives here. Have you heard any pushback of things that this room should know or this conference should know of how we can kind of better integrate with the NEIs of the world, the traditional energy world, what conversation are you hearing from your members, good, bad, or indifferent, on this piece?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a massive pushback, not to Bitcoin mining, but to really behind the meter applications in general. We're starting to see a lot of this concern about taking existing assets and using them for behind the meter generation, taking new assets and using them for behind the meter generation. And this really goes back to that scarcity argument that I talked about earlier. And so I think addressing where some of those sentiments are coming from is really important. But I don't think it's really so much a Bitcoin only scenario. I think it's just making clear to people that we're going to need large amounts of carbon-free energy in the future, regardless of what the uses are. And so we really need to be focused on how we can build that, and not so much focused on how we're going to control what the demands are and deal with a greatly limited supply.
Appreciate it. I guess just kind of a little pitch for NEI on our end of our last minute or so here. What are you guys kind of looking forward to, in this next, I guess, how many months do we have left? 8 months of the year into maybe obviously we're in DC, talk about policy. We have a big election coming up. What's NEI doing the rest of this year? And then also how can, this world of Bitcoin get engaged with the NEI or with NEI? Are there any conferences, anything they should be, looking at online, getting involved in your conferences? Do you guys have anything coming up?
Yeah, so we have our Nuclear Energy Policy Summit coming up here in DC in May. So would encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about, the state of nuclear energy, where we're at in the policy development process. We're gonna have a lot of good conversations there. There's gonna be a lot of talk about offtake and a lot of talk about new demand we're seeing for nuclear. So we encourage anyone to be there. I also, if anyone wants to chat afterwards, I'm always happy to be accessible. I think the real value of these kinds of events is being able to build your network and to be able to help find these deals and answer questions. So happy to do that. As far as the industry in general, we had a really major milestone earlier this year. We had Vogtle 4 finally come online, so that's been really exciting. Long time in the making, but I can officially say we're at 94 reactors, which is great. And then we're also seeing a lot of orders and demand and deals being done for new reactors. So I'm really hopeful that we'll by the end of the year we'll have an order book of those and be looking at going into 2025 building some more new reactors.
And I guess it's a good. Are we out of time there? Yeah. So I guess that's a good way to end it. But you mentioned Vogtle. I just got to say that's a prime example of. I know there's some miners in this room whose companies are getting some of that power down in Georgia. So there's a prime example to end it on of how our industries are kind of working together. So appreciate the time, everyone. If you have any questions, come feel free to chat with myself or Benton after this, and look forward to talking some more.
Thanks, Tom.